Hello and welcome to Getting Smart with Smart Objects. Today we're going to be talking all about smart objects, from the very basics to the advantages and disadvantages of using them, and even some more advanced things that you might have not known about using smart objects. So let's get started. So first off, what is a smart object? Smart objects are layers that contain image data from raster or vector images, such as a PSD, PDF, RAW, or AI files. Smart objects preserve an image's source content with all its original characteristics, enabling you to perform non-destructive editing to the layer. That's the definition from Adobe. In layman's terms, a smart object is pretty much a container that allows you to edit its contents without harming it. So when you talk about smart objects, you're mainly talking about the differences between destructive editing and non-destructive editing. So let's go over what those two things are real quick. First off is destructive editing. This is a way of editing to where you are using eraser tools, you are applying filters to layers, adjustments to layers, and once you have applied those, there's no way of going back and undoing what you've done, unless it's in the history, of course. As you can see here, little Jimmy is about to break the eraser tool out on his fire truck. This would be destructive. Even his little sister is saying, "Hey, use a layer mask." So don't be like Jimmy here. We're going to use layer mask smart objects and go into non-destructive editing. Now, non-destructive editing is where you ensure that whatever you do to a layer, you are able to undo or change at a later point if the client doesn't like it or if you decide you don't like it. So with non-destructive editing, you get to have your cake and eat it too. Okay, so now let's look at how to create a smart object. First, I want to note that I am in the latest version of Photoshop, which is a 2014.2 release. So things may look different if you're not in this version, but don't worry. Everything that I do is available from CS6 and on. So first, I'm going to go into Bridge and grab an image and show you how to create a smart object from it. So let's open this with Photoshop. I'm going to drag this into my document. And then to create a smart object from this, we're going to go to the layer, right click, convert to smart object. Now it's a smart object. When we double click it, it's in its own PSB file. Now we're going to begin to go over some of the advantages of using smart objects. First up, performing non-destructive transforms. You can scale, rotate, skew, distort, or warp a layer without losing original image data or quality because the transforms don't affect the original data. So let's go into Photoshop and see how that works. Here I have two images. One is a smart object and one is just on a regular layer. Let's transform these to a much smaller image. Now, a couple things happened. Our regular layer has been transformed, our smart object has as well, and they both look the same. If we hit Ctrl T on this, we can look at its new values of 100 and 100. Photoshop has resized this, and this is its new image size now. If we do the same to the smart object, we can see that Photoshop has remembered the transform we have done and is only displaying the image at that size. So if we ever wanted to bring these images back to a larger state, you can see that the regular layer is much blurrier than the smart object. This is because Photoshop does not edit the original data. It only displays the data as the way you transformed it. And at any point, we can go and see what the original data is. So this is it at 100%, and the smart object will always remember it that way. We can also use smart objects just like we use layers, which means we can apply layer mask. So when you have your smart object, it acts just like a layer. We still have all of our options that we would for a normal layer, like adding effects and a layer mask. So another advantage of smart objects is being able to work with vector data. You can bring vector data into Photoshop without rasterizing it. So if we go into Illustrator, Edit, Copy, and now bring this into Photoshop with Edit, Paste, you will see a dialog box that allows us to paste as a smart object. So let's go ahead and paste this as a smart object. Give it a couple transforms and you'll be able to see that it's retaining all of its vector detail. Also, at any point, you can double click on the vector smart object and it'll actually open it in Illustrator. You can make edits to your file, save it, and back in Photoshop you'll see it has been updated. You can also perform non-destructive filtering, so let's check that out in Photoshop. Here I've written out some text and I'm going to convert it to a smart object. So now that it's a smart object, we can apply filters to this. Let's go to Blur, Radial Blur. We'll leave the default settings. You can see here, it applied the filter as a smart filter. At any point, I can go back in and change the radial blur settings. Also, you'll notice this white square is actually a mask. So you can mask out the filter as needed. So all I'm doing here is painting away the radial blur filter. This is extremely powerful for creating visual effects that you just couldn't do in previous versions of Photoshop without multiple steps. Now let's take a look at some other filtering techniques. I'm going to go ahead and convert this to a smart object and apply a filter to it. I'm going to go to Filter, Other, High Pass. Now we're going to use this high pass filter as a sharpening tool for our image. Hit OK. We're going to double click here to change its blending mode. We're going to set the blending mode to overlay, and we could use this slider to control how much of the effect we would like. I'm going to keep it at 100. And now I want to increase the contrast, so a way to do that would be Other, Offset, and what the offset filter does is takes the image and duplicates it on top of itself. You can see if I adjust the horizontal, it offsets the image, but if you keep it at 0, it's just an image sitting on top of the same image. So if we take this and change its blending mode to overlay, you can see it greatly increases the contrast while also increasing the saturation. Going to back this effect down some. So now we have a sharpener and a contrast both in our smart filters. If we wanted to control how much of this effect is applied at the same time, we can use our mask for that. We're going to use our density slider. Since density works with how much black is in your mask, we're going to have to change our mask to black. So Alt Backspace, we'll fill it with black. Now when we go to properties and use our density slider, you can see as I slowly slide the density down, it increases the amount of the effects of both filters at the same time. You could think of the density slider as a master control for your smart filters mask. And here is the before and the after. You are also able to nest smart objects inside one of another. So let's go back to our blurry vision example. I'm going to right click, convert to smart object. And now we have a pixel representation of our smart object from before. We can continue to add filters to this, like lighting effects. Hit OK. And we have a new smart filters which we're able to mask and edit just like before. So let's add another. Let's do find edges. One cool thing is when you're working with smart filters, you can change how they interact. So we can edit the blending options of this find edges. Let's do multiply. And again, we can mask out what we don't want. So say we wanted the edges to not have so much of the effect. So that's the power of being able to use smart filters with smart objects and nesting them inside one of another. So another cool thing you can do with nesting smart objects is have the ability to stack layer styles. So let me show you. I'm going to add a stroke to this text. Let's make it 4 pixels and change it to white. Now I'm going to convert this to a smart object and do the same thing. But now you'll see that it's stroking the previous stroke. And I will convert again, and you can keep applying layer styles on top of pre-applied layer styles. So as you can see, I've stacked up a bunch of layer styles to get this effect, which you couldn't do before without rasterizing the layer. So we'll be able to, since this isn't rasterized and all done in smart objects, go into here and say we wanted this to be, let's change it to italicized. Make sure it fits within the document bounds. And save this and go check it out. You'll notice that no changes have been applied. I have saved this, but what you're going to have to do is save every smart object down the line. So we'll need to make the save here and the save here as well. Now you can see that the object has been updated. So another advantage is being able to edit one smart object and automatically update all of its linked instances. So let's open this up in Photoshop. I'm going to drag this into our document and convert it to a smart object. Let's transform it down. Now every time you duplicate this smart object, it creates a copy of the original. So if you were to go in and edit the original, let's edit its levels. And save it. You can see that it automatically updates all of its linked instances. This is really good if you have multiple objects that are the same in your design. One last advantage of smart objects is being able to use them as placeholders for low resolution assets. So say you're working on a billboard design and all you can find online is a low-res logo. This is going to be much too small for your billboard, but you can continue working as long as you use smart objects. So go ahead and transform this to the size that you'll be needing, and then convert it to a smart object. From here you can keep working and be able to make transforms. Let's add some effects. Let's give it a gradient overlay. And a bevel. So once you get your high-res logo, you'll be able to go into here, take your high-res logo, and just drag it in. Go ahead and resize it to the document bounds. And hit save. You can see that we could easily replace our placeholder image with the new high-res image while retaining all of our transforms and effects. Unfortunately, smart objects also have their disadvantages. First being the larger than normal file sizes. So let's go into Photoshop so you can see what I'm talking about. I have two PSDs open, both set up the same with a layer and a background, and a high resolution image placed into it. Let's go ahead and get these to size. I'm gonna get this to 14%. But with this one, I want to make sure that I can keep my resolution, so I'm gonna turn it into a smart object and also transform it to 14%. Let's save both of these now. You can see this one does not have a smart object and this one does. Now in Bridge, let's check out their file sizes. As you can see down here, this is 25 megs and the one without a smart object is only 1 meg. The reason is the one with the smart object is retaining all the data that was inside of it. As you can see, we're still at 14% and it has remembered 100% of the data. While this one, it recalculated the data into a smaller form and has gotten rid of all the extra details. So with smart objects, you need to be careful about how large the smart object actually is, because your file size can get pretty large pretty quick. Another disadvantage is that there's no simple way to unsmart a smart object. So let's say we have this and we wanted to apply his face onto his. So we size it, get it the way we like it, and then we take these layers, convert it to a smart object. So we could use this in our design. And then later you say, okay, you know what, that was a bad idea. I want to go back to the original one. If you go here and look, you can't do anything with this smart object to break it apart as if it was a group. If it was a group, you could just say ungroup and you would have all your layers back. So unfortunately, the only way to do it is go in. You could turn this layer off, save it. You would have your original back, but the problem with this is, again, file size. That layer will always still be there. So the best way to do it is to just take this, drag this back into your document, and then delete your smart object. This way you have the original image out of a smart object and you can start again. Another disadvantage smart objects have is that layers inside the smart object cannot blend with layers outside of the smart object. So here we have some text with a drop shadow. I have the drop shadow set to overlay. If I was to take this and convert it to a smart object, you'll notice that my blending mode has been ignored. What the smart object is doing is taking the actual pixels of the drop shadow and the text and creating one coherent image out of it, as if this was just a JPEG. Since it can no longer distinguish what's the drop shadow and what's the text, it can no longer apply the blending mode to just the drop shadow pixels. So when you're doing this, again, since there's no way to unsmart a smart object, let's go ahead, take this, pull it back out, delete our smart object. What you're going to want to do is copy your layer style, clear your layer style, then convert to smart object and apply your layer style to that smart object. Keep the drop shadow onto the smart object so you could retain your blending mode. Another disadvantage is that smart objects can have different settings in their parent file. While this might seem like an advantage, it usually turns out to be more of a headache than anything else. If you convert to a smart object, you can actually change the settings of the smart object to differ than your parent file. So if we have a look down here, right now we're in an untagged RGB color profile with 8 bits per channel. So we can change this to 16 bits per channel, change it to CMYK, save, and you can see here in our parent profile that it's still an untagged RGB with 8 bits per channel, even though our smart object is now CMYK with 16 bits. So when you're working with different color profiles in smart objects, you'll need to take some extra steps to ensure that your colors stay the same. First way to do that is by going to Edit, Color Settings, and under your color management policies, ask Photoshop to tell you when there's profile mismatches. Ask when opening and also ask when pasting. This will tell Photoshop to give you a heads up if you're working in different color profiles. So let's go to File, New. This time we're going to be in Swap with CMYK color. Hit OK. Let's make the background black. And first I'm going to go inside of this smart object, hit OK, and drag this into our document with a different color profile. It's going to give us a warning, and let's go ahead and tell it to convert. And size this down. Okay, now we're going to drag the smart object into the same document and do the same thing and tell Photoshop to convert. Scale this down some. Now you can see in the blues and the reds that the colors are not matching. That's because since this is still in a smart object, Photoshop is not actually converting the profile. It's only assigning the swap profile to the Lamar Fuji profile, and it's causing a color mismatch. So the way to fix this is to convert the profile within the smart object. When we try to open it, you will see that Photoshop realizes that this is still in Lamar Fuji. So we're going to ask it to convert to the Documents working space. Hit Control S. And now you can see that the colors are matching. Smart objects created in Photoshop are rendered at their native size. So let me show you what I mean by that. We take an image, place it as a smart object, then we transform this down and convert this to a smart object. Photoshop is going to render this new smart object at its native size, which is small. So if I was to pull it back up, you will see it causes it to blur. This also happens with text and vector. So let's create some text real quick. And a vector shape to demonstrate. Okay, so if I was to take both of these are vector. Once you turn it into a smart object, it actually rasterizes the information, and when you scale up the text or the vector shape, you can see it becomes pixelated. So This is just how smart objects work. This isn't a bug or anything. You just need to be aware that this is the case. So if I wanted to scale this text up, I wouldn't do it here. I would have to go into my smart object, give myself a little bit more room, and then do my scaling within the smart object. Save, then close. Then Photoshop will render the vector pieces correctly. Editing one smart object automatically updates all its linked instances. So this can be looked at an advantage or a disadvantage depending on what you want to accomplish. So let's create a shape. We're going to convert this to a smart object and then duplicate it. Now, if I wanted to change one of the colors of these smart objects, let's say to a green, it will update both. So if you didn't want that result, there's a way to duplicate the smart object to where they are not linked. The way you do that is by right-clicking and go to New Smart Object via Copy. This way it'll duplicate your smart object, but if you were to edit the color, let's go back to blue, save it, it will not change the original that it was copied from. So let's take a quick look at the history of smart objects. In Photoshop CS2, smart objects were first introduced. In CS3, smart filters were introduced. So smart objects with smart filters have been available since CS3 and any version beyond that. With Photoshop CS6, they introduced some new video controls and now allow you to use video smart objects. Let's quickly go over what I mean by video smart object. Here I have an MP4 file. I could just drag this into Photoshop. This is available on CS6 and on. And you'll see a timeline window pops up. If we right-click on our video, convert it to a smart object, we now have the ability to apply any filter or adjustment to this video that we would be able to apply to an image in Photoshop. So let's just add a blur, radial blur, change it to zoom. So now, as I scroll through, you can see every frame of this video has a zoom blur effect. From here, you could click on this arrow and tell Photoshop to render the video. In Photoshop CC, they updated smart objects once again and allowed you to use linked smart objects. So now let's take a quick look at how linked smart objects work. Let's say you're working on a job that has two sisters and you want to put a logo in each. This would be a good time to use linked smart objects. So here's our logo. It's an AI file. And we're going to go ahead and place these into Photoshop. You can go to File, Place Linked. Now this is only available in the 14.2 release of Photoshop, so the newest version of Photoshop. Place Linked, hit OK. Let's remember our values of 55%. And right here, you can see the difference. This is a smart object icon, and this is a linked object icon. So now I'm going to go and do this for each file. So now I have the AI file linked up in all of these jobs. I'm going to go ahead and save and close this one. Now let's say at some point you were asked to make a change to this logo. I'm going to go ahead and turn this layer off and turn this one on. So we've made a font change and made our text white. Since this AI file is linked to our Photoshop files, you can see that it automatically updates in every file that this is associated with. Let's go to the file that was closed. And you can see that since the file was closed, it didn't automatically update. If you go here and click on Smart Objects, you can see that we have one changed smart object. So right here you can see we have a little caution sign. So if we right click on this, we have some options. We can update modified content or update all modified content. Go ahead and click that and you'll see that we now have the new logo. So this logo is not actually a part of the PSD. It's an external file that's just placed into the PSD. So if I was to send this PSD to someone else, they would also need this AI file for it to work. So before you send your job off, you're going to want to embed the linked smart object. And the way to do that is to click on it, go to its properties, and then click embed and save. So now this logo.ai file has been embedded into the PSD. You're going to want to do this for each. And now you can send this PSD off and anyone will be able to open it and see the logo in Illustrator. So that's all for the Getting Smart with Smart Objects video. I hope you enjoyed and learned something about smart objects today. Happy photoshopping!